Hi, today I'd like to talk a little about the top 10 tournament and versus fighting games on the Amiga. You will not find any walking beat'em ups on this list though. That's a subject for an entirely different video. But before we start, please make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons below. It's just a couple of clicks for you, but helps me a lot. Thanks. There were quite a few fighting games on the Amiga, and a whole spectrum of those at that. From real stinkers to games that were one of a kind or even platform exclusives. So, before we get to the top 10, let's take a very quick look at other notable but not necessarily good titles in the genre. Stellar graphics and sound, awful animation and gameplay. Only ever good in short bursts with a friend and not against CPU. Annoying disk swapping hell. Cartoon animal characters, plenty of beautiful stages and overall great presentation. Boring gameplay and nothing to write home about. Definitely one to forget. Dangerous Streets looked great on stills in magazines. In real life, it looked and played like a nightmare. Bad graphics, awful music and sound, and no fun whatsoever. I don't think I've ever seen a game with fewer animation frames per character. Elfmania may have looked and sound great, but I don't think there were any QA people involved in the development. Feels more like a very advanced demo showing off Amiga's capabilities rather than a game. It was not a great game in the arcades, and it's even worse on the Amiga. Graphics seem to be great everywhere, outside of actual fights. Dinos themselves look as if they had 3 or 4 colors each only. It's just a mess. Only one playable character in the story mode. Way too many discs for swapping and not enough gameplay to justify it. If you ever come across it, do yourself a favor and avoid it like a poo on a sidewalk. Incredibly fluid animations and pretty nice pixel artsy graphics. Honestly, it's not as bad as people make it out to be, but to be clear, it's not a good game either. Best played in 2-player versus mode. An obscure Polish fighting title with digitized graphics. Clearly trying to benefit from Mortal Kombat's fame. Gameplay speed is based on hardware, meaning it's unplayable in emulation or on upgraded Amigas. This game has probably one of the best graphics in this whole video. Not much fun though, as it seems that it was made by someone who never played fighting games. It's the best body blows out of both games. And that's not saying a lot. Sure, graphics and sound are pretty cool, especially the stages and weird character designs. Also, since we're on the subject, there's 12 fighters to choose from, which should allow for near infinite replayability. But somehow it doesn't, and the game just feels flat, for the lack of a better word. It feels basic, to the point of being devourer of content. I mean, the special moves are few and far in between, and honestly, there's not much fun to be had here when compared to other titles on this list. Capital Punishment is one of the last few gaming calls of Amiga's last days. It's an abomination of a child spawned by ungodly love between Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat. At least that's what it seems the developers were aiming for. And that's probably one of the biggest problems of this title. It wanted to be as good as both of these, and ended up being a master of none. Leaving aside its unrealistic by the dying system standards hardware requirements, Capital Punishment looked pretty nice, had some very neat graphical effects and few decent gameplay ideas. But it all seemed to be loosely connected by imaginary strings and not coherent design direction. And in the end, the game was just not fun. Most of you will probably disagree with this placement and say that 8th spot is way too high for it. After all, it seems like Street Fighter II for the Amiga is an excellent example on how to waste perfectly good license on a bad port. And it is a bad port, no doubt about that. The fighter's animations lacked many of the frames, making it choppy at best, and the scrolling was horrendous. But it was the only Street Fighter II game on the Amiga for over 3 years. And truth be told, everything was converted. All characters, moves, stages and bonus games, everything. It was worse than basically any Street Fighter port to any other 16-bit system, but by 1992 it was the best one on the Amiga. No explosions, no fireballs or lightning kicks, none of that. And still, while being a descendant of a C64 title, IK Plus is incredibly fun against a friend. It's fast and simple but very technical at that, and requires careful choice of attacks rather than a frantic pulling off of fiery special moves that other games did. It is a fossil of even older times than the Amigas, but even as a fossil, it's a treasure and one of the most enjoyable fighters in couch versus mode. Graphics are a definite step up to C64's original, but by Amiga standards they were at best just okay. This is by far the best Street Fighter II game on the Amiga. Sure, the sprites were heavily reduced in size and the background animations were entirely removed, but other than that, all arcade's features are present. All 16 characters, their specials, all stages and bonus games are here, and it's most fluid Street Fighter game on the Amiga. It's not technically or graphically anything special, but plays just as you'd expect. And other than not having too many frames of animations on characters, there's nothing bad I could really say about it. Mortal Kombat on the Amiga was the first game that made me go, ha, I never thought it possible. It was nigh perfect conversion of the most controversial game of the early 90s. All 7 fighters, their moves and fatalities were brought down to Amiga and worked fine, given you're used to annoying one-button controls and all the joystick acrobatics they require. Graphics were not as nice as in the latter game, but when it was released I didn't know that yet. But what was way better than in Mortal Kombat 2 was the single-player mode, which was challenging but never unfair or cheating. Shadow Fighter is often considered Amiga's exclusive answer to Street Fighter, and it's easy to see why. The graphics and sound are pretty nice, and the selection of 16 completely different fighters is more than enough to glue fighting game lovers to screen for hours on end. Judging it now after so many years, it's clear that it's a labor of love, tailored to Amiga's unique strong and weak points alike. One of the very few fighting games that's actually very playable with just one button on the joystick. Chock full of special moves, even if I can't pull them off anymore. Our third spot is my most favorite two-player couch versus fighting game on the Amiga. Not so much in single player, as the CPU cheats and reads players' controller inputs. Sadly, it's been proven and it's just a bad and lazy game design. Graphics and sound-wise, it's a perfect arcade port given Amiga's limited capabilities. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn that there are more than 32 colors on the screen. And there aren't. All 12 fighters, along with their special attacks, are carried over to Amiga and nothing is amiss. It's a hell of a disk swapper if you have less than 2 MB of RAM in your Amiga. Fightin Spirit was released at the tail end of Amiga's life. It looked and sounded amazing. Definitely one of the most beautiful titles on the system. Similarities to SNK games are impossible to overlook, however. Presentation aside, the selection of 10 completely different fighters is nice, as each of them play uniquely and has a wide spectrum of special moves. 2-button controls for supporting joysticks and gamepads allowed for easier pulling off of these. It's an Amiga exclusive that looks and plays as if it was run on arcade cabinet and not home system. Now this is probably where some of you will consider this whole list completely wrong. But hear me out, I can explain why Panza Kickboxing is the right choice for this first spot. It is definitely neither best looking nor best sounding game on this list, not even close to it actually. It's not full of quirky and weird, often otherworldly characters or flashy and explosive special moves. None of that are here. But what it does extremely well. It's a realistic versus fighting game with baked-in RPG and management elements. It allows you to create your own fighter and teach him real-life kickboxing moves out of horrifically huge list and train him to become the best. The gameplay and chasing that next win is so fun and addictive that I pretty much guarantee that if you invest an hour into it, you'll spend many more playing on your own accord. It's very fun against a friend too, because it's probably the most technical fighter on this whole list. 10 out of 10. Now that was a list and a half. I'm pretty sure that some of you will disagree with some of my placements, and if you do, let me know in the comments below and let's talk about that. Anyway, if you liked the video, hit that like and subscribe below. It's nothing more than 2 clicks for you, but helps me a lot. And if you're in generous mood, you may want to consider a small donation. It would help me make more better content, get better mic, upgrade my editing rig, and perhaps even get a camera. Details are in the description below. That said, for me this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time.